After Italy fell to the Allies in 1943, the 15th Air Force, under General Nathan Twining, moved to Italy to enable the bombing raids deep into Nazi territory. During the bombing campaign over Romania, and we've all heard about that, the oil fields, the flight path was right smack over Nazi-occupied Yugoslavia, and hundreds of American airmen were shot down. Tremendous losses. Actually, it's amazing because the amount of airplanes that were shot down versus the amount of airmen killed were quite disproportionate. Like, out of all the airplanes shot down, only 10% of the occupants were killed. Many of them bailed out, of course. Well, within occupied Yugoslavia, there were two distinctive resistance movements, the partisans and the Chetniks. The partisans were communists under Joseph Broz Tito, and sought to make Yugoslavia in the image of the Soviet Union, who of course was our ally. The Chetniks, led by Draza Mihailovic, were exclusively Serbs, and they sought to reestablish the status quo in which they were always the boss most of the time. So besides fighting the Axis, the partisans and the Chetniks also fought each other. Initially, the Allies began supplying the Chetniks with arms, but gradually switched the bulk of their support to the partisans, whom they judged to be more effective. Remember, we were all fighting the Germans. So despite being dumped by the US or by the Allies, the Chetniks went out of their way to rescue Allied airmen who were shot down on their way back from bombing the oil refineries. And by the summer of 1944, there were over 500 of these guys, mostly American. Local Serbians, farmers, peasants, and whatnot, risked their own lives to give refuge to these airmen while they waited for rescue, which wasn't common. But the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, devised a plan to rescue them over the objections of the British, who didn't wish to antagonize the partisans. The British were strongly against it, but Twining said, "Baloney, we're going to go get our guys," and they did. In July 1944, Operation Halyard was born. The OSS drew up plans to send a team to the Chetniks, who were led by General Draza Mihailovic, in the German-occupied territory in Serbia, for the purpose of evacuating Allied airmen shot down over that area. This volunteer team, known as the Halyard Team, was commanded by Lieutenant George Rasulin, along with Master Sergeant Michael Radacic, I don't know how to do that, and Specialist Arthur Jubilian, who was a radio operator, who had joined the Navy to become an aviator. He was turned down for that because they had too many pilots, and ended up as a radio man, as an enlisted man. And the risks of this were incredible. He volunteered to go into this occupied territory. The Chetniks and the airmen made by hand, without tools, mostly at night, without alerting the Germans, and without endangering the villagers. They made a landing strip in the middle of the Serbian mountains, large enough for C-47 cargo planes to land and survivors. Cargo planes had to make it through enemy airspace and back without getting shot down themselves. Amazingly, in 1944, in August of 1944, 73 years ago, it worked. And over a couple of weeks, some 500 or so were rescued. None were shot down. After the war, Tito, who ended up in power, had Mihailovic tried for treason. The Americans were not even allowed to speak on his behalf and were ordered silent. Mihailovic was shot by firing squad for being a traitor. This story was not well known for decades. It had been classified with the U.S. State Department for over half a century for political reasons, for whatever reason. There's a book about this, The Forgotten 500, which was written in 2007. It took that long to do it. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. And it's interesting not just because of the rescue, but the convolutions of the political atmosphere in those days. Who was a partisan, who was a communist, who was what, who was fighting whom, and who was on whose side. It's really a fantastic story, and it tells about a lot of the individuals who were involved in it. I would encourage you to look it up, or at least Google it and see, especially the interview with this guy, Arthur Jubilian. It's just fantastic. He died recently. Bill.
Just to give you all some idea of the history that this organization has had. A few years back, we had a fellow by the name of Hank Hine from New Cumberland who flew one of the C-47s in to rescue those men. And about 2 years later, we had one of the men he rescued as our speaker. And I took them both to dinner. And it turns out that when the fellow that Hank rescued got on the plane, he went up to the cockpit and gave him 3 Serbian coins and says, "This is to pay for my trip." And that night at dinner, Hank gave him back to him and said, "Your trip was free."
Thank you, Bill. It's just a fabulous story.
That gentleman that was the speaker was Frank Lashinsky.
Yes.
He had stayed a member for quite a while, but unfortunately he passed away.
Correct. Yeah, fabulous history. Wonderful guy. Wonderful guy. He was here for many years. Anyway, I urge you to Google the Forgotten 500 to learn about this. It's just a terrific story that a lot of people never heard of. Okay, Vice President Charlie Lloyd. A couple of months ago, I made the statement that we're looking for more and more people. We're getting kind of thin in our forward ranks, and so many people have come forward and said, "Hey, how about this guy? How about that guy?" So Charlie's now overloaded with volunteers to speak well in the next year. I suspect he is now going to take the trip to Cancun with Bill. Anyway, he'll tell you about tonight's some upcoming activities and tonight's program. Charlie?
Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, that was a plea we made because we're working with veterans that are in their 90s and they're a little bit more difficult to find and willing to speak. So we put the call out, Kurt put it out, I put it out, and lo and behold, we've got the results. Is Doug Riley here? Doug Riley gave me the name of Mickey Yankovic. That's a Ukrainian from Kolkmau. Where's Chris here? Chris went up and interviewed him, but it was supposed to be a half an hour. It was 2 hours and 15 minutes, Chris, remember? Amazing story. He radar engineer on a B-24. They got a bomb into Japan. 13 missions over Japan. Their job was to precede the B-29s, and they would bomb the airfields and do propaganda and all that kind of stuff. But he's an amazing guy with an amazing story, and he'll be here next month to share that with us. So I was going to thank Doug Riley, is a fellow that has that World War II tribute in Dillsburg every year. It's next weekend. It's speakers, World War II speakers. It's a laid-back weekend. It's one day actually. If you haven't been there, it's really nice. They bring in equipment and everything else. Joe Chikart, are you here? There he is. You listened quite well. I got an email from Joe and said he was at a picnic or something, and he talked to a veteran, Don Conley. He used to give him a call. I called him. It couldn't have been nicer. He said, "I'd love to come and meet your people and talk." So thank you for that, Joe. We appreciate it. And that's not all he's done. He's been very supportive ever since he's been here. So now we got, we're in October. World War II weekend, I met Bill Philly. Some of you people probably know him. He was a B-24 radio engineer, and he flew out of Mandarina. I can't remember right. Mandarina, Italy, and they had, I think he had so many missions going into Palestina, the oil fields where all the anti-aircraft was. He was shot down and became a prisoner. And that's the fellow you were talking about, Bill Philly, and he met Frank Lashinsky. So, and then I found a Sheldon Winkler. This is November. This is a strange one. Dr. Winkler lives in Arizona. He grew up before the war and played the piano. His mother taught him chords, and all they did was play war songs, music of World War II. And Oh, you remember the book? Thank you so much. I leave that. But I talked to him about 45 minutes. He's going to come in from Arizona and put on a presentation with all the music of those years. I remember that my older sisters would sing, my mother would play the piano. So we sang those songs a lot. That's November. December, we have Dick Schimmel coming in, who's a Pearl Harbor survivor. December 7th, that's rather timely. He's coming in, and I talked to, Mike sent me a name called Winnie, and she is a daughter of a mother who was a nurse in Pearl Harbor. So we're going to put both of them on the stage. We're going to have a Pearl Harbor night with Pearl Harbor people. So that should go well. Michelle, you want to make an announcement?
Well, you've already hit the Dillsburg event.
Huh?
This is I was here to promote the Dillsburg event.
Oh, I'm
I have some flyers now. It's great.
Okay.
It's already, word's already on.
We're talking about tribute, World War II tribute in Dillsburg. She has flyers, so please come and get flyers. It's a nice event, it really is. It's low key, no pressure, and everybody has fun. Want to add to that? Please come.
Please come. Yes, definitely. I thought about dressing up for putting on the uniform I wear tonight, but you have to come and see the transformation.
We'll do that. Thank you for that. Then of all places, I got a call from Glenn Miller in Edgewood, Maryland, 95 years old, 75th Division. And I said, well, that's quite a way. He says, don't worry about it. My wife and I will drive up there. You don't have to worry about it. So he's going to be coming up. He was in Belgium, fought there. He actually was in battle Christmas Eve and ended up in the Colmar pocket. But he's going to drive up from Maryland. Herman Pfister's coming after that. Herman was a young, which time? Young Volk? Young Bull, Hitler Youth.
Cub Scout.
Well, actually, he went all the way up to the top. What's the older one?
Yeah, Hitler Youth.
Yeah, so he's a Hitler Youth. He actually is in World War II. He has a business for heraldry and that, and he has a history of what it was like to be what we would call a Boy Scout and grow up that way with that indoctrination. He came here in '67. And became a citizen and joined our army. He's very interesting. Bill, I'm going to let Dutch Harbor go next month. I don't have all that information. Bill has another lead for us. Everybody's coming in with leads. Thank you for that. And we have a Victor Mahal from Shamokin. Christian, I try to see him, but he is a practicing chiropractor, 96 years old, works 8 hours a day. So he'll be coming down as well. So, in order to wrap up on that is thank you for your support and helping us keep the levels up with the people coming in. It's very important. Also, World War II weekend, I met a very delightful couple. They're our speakers tonight. I'm not going to take a lot of their thunder, but Linda is going to, excuse me, is it Mrs. MacArthur? It's Linda, okay. She's going to speak briefly and introduce herself and some of the things, her recollection, or her interpretations of what the war was like for the women in those years. And then she's going to introduce her husband, General Douglas MacArthur, Brian Woodcock. Linda Woodcock, you're on.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Hummelstown is a beautiful little town. I certainly love it. And my name is Linda Woodcock. I am not Mrs. Woodcock because that sounds like my husband's mother. From the Revolutionary Wars to the present, America's women veterans have been invisible heroines. They are true examples for future generations that securing America's liberty and freedoms is everyone's responsibility. As a nation, we need to recognize our women veterans, our grandmothers, our aunts, our sisters, our friends, who have served this country through military service. For indeed, theirs is a proud and honorable heritage. We need to pay tribute to America's veterans for the freedoms that you and I so enjoy today. I am so proud to be able to portray and represent the women veterans, those who have served in the wars or labored on the home front. These are women who served as nurses on board hospital ships, or served their country as clerks or secretaries at the war depots, all not only supporting the military system, but also the old guard, who then didn't realize the capabilities of women, that they could serve not only in war, but also in industry. I'm happy to say that is all changing now. In my many decades of service in industry, and with quite a lot of discussions with women veterans, I've become painfully aware of these shortcomings in the old system. And I can truly appreciate the personal drive and dedication these women had to have had then, and even now, to do their duty to serve their country while pursuing a career. My husband, General MacArthur, and I not only support the veterans, but you, the men and women who serve today, protecting our hard-won peace in this very unsettled world. You are serving in the finest military in the world. Your service, your dedication, and your professionalism shows it. And we're all proud of you. Now, I'd like you to relax and let your mind wander back to March 1942. And I present General Douglas MacArthur.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I have returned. Thank you. Honored veterans, representatives of this great town, ladies and gentlemen, my wife and I are pleased to be able to come to you tonight to deliver some speeches regarding history. History, ladies and gentlemen, will not change, although many will try to change it. But most of all, it can be forgotten. And it is through organizations like the World War II Round Table and individuals like me who have been there and done that. We have to tell our young people what it was like for them to have to be brought up and live peacefully like they are today. My presentation tonight will be in 3 parts. I will tell you about Douglas MacArthur at the beginning of the war and what he said. And then I will talk about my service and my life as a young boy being bombed out of London during the war, coming to the United States later, and living the American dream. And then after that, I will go back to General MacArthur at the end of the war and what he said then. So, ladies and gentlemen, in 1942, the world was in a terrible, terrible state. War was raging in Europe.
War was raging just about all over the world. And it was because of Hitler, a dictator, a crazy man, Mussolini, another crazy man, and Tojo, who was bent on taking over China. All throughout England, Europe, Australia, the United States, Canada, all the politicians knew well what these people were like and what their dreams were to take over the world. The politicians being what they were, they let it happen. Kind of reminds you of what's going on today. So anyway, General MacArthur was caught short. He was overwhelmed in the Philippines. He lost his army, he lost his air force. The Navy couldn't do much for him because they were fighting the battle in the Atlantic. Europe first was the order of the day. The General MacArthur was ordered out by the president. And through a miracle of Bremer Barber and through the Navy, they got him out through PT boats and got him to Australia. And when he got to Australia, it is this time when the man came through. His speech went like this when he arrived in Australia. The President of the United States ordered me to break through the Japanese lines and proceed from Corregidor to Australia for the purpose, as I understand it, of organizing the American offensive against Japan. A prime objective of which is the relief of the Philippines. I came through, and I shall return. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the media in those days, unlike today, was on the side of truth, was on the side of backing up the military, and the word got out, I shall return. That became the war cry all over the world. It was the first positive statement that was coming out of all this smoke and explosions and war. And later on, in, I guess it was 43, as a kid, I picked up a match cover in England, and on it was a picture of MacArthur, and it said, I shall return. I remember that. So that gave everybody sort of a leg up that this guy means his business. So America, they're coming to England, and we knew they were, because my uncles, when Pearl Harbor happened, I remember my dad and he talking, saying, you know what? The Yanks are in it now. There's a chance we could win. So that's the first part of my presentation. General MacArthur wasn't going to have any of it. And he got out. They snuck him out. And one thing I learned recently that is not very well known, somebody else shipped out another bunch of people, very, very important, and actually helped MacArthur win the Philippines back. It was the code breakers. When Bataan fell, they snuck out MacArthur, and somehow they got the whole group of code breakers out too. And once in Australia, MacArthur pulled these people together, listened to what they had to say, and realized he had a secret weapon. So that was a big part of MacArthur's strategy for winning back the Philippines. So now I'm going to go back to 1940. I was there. I lived in downtown London. And my mother and father and I, in a very short period of time, were living in subways, wherever we could find a place, because 3 times we had to move. Buildings were bombed out. All over London, all the open spaces were anti-aircraft gun sites, barrage balloon sites, listening sites, You could not imagine what an arsenal of weapons London was. And of course, in the latter part of 1940, the bombing was almost constant for 2 months. My father was a London firefighter. You know, you look back at those days, and it's very difficult to believe how archaic they were. My father went out in the streets in his Class A uniforms. He had a paper mache helmet, and they fought the fires with wooden ladders and hoses. When he came over here many years later, when they found out I was going to the States, he said, hell, if he can do it, we can do it. So that's the kind of attitude that he had. He could write a book on what he went through during the Blitz. And after being bombed out 3 times, lost everything, living with friends, living in the subway, he came home and said, there's no way we can survive this. I've got to transfer to a small town called Luton. Luton, by the way, is where the shoe bomber came from. Remember that cat? So Luton was 30 miles away. And I remember that night vividly. And that night was to play another important part in my life. Because we showed up at St. Pancras Station. And I had a little suitcase, and the stations in those days was completely mobbed with soldiers, sailors, people trying to get out of town. So walking along the platform, all the cars were just full, 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 full. And the train went as far as the eye could see. So we kept walking and walking. I'm a little guy, I'm about 4 years old, 5 years old. And suddenly the air raid siren started going off. Now everybody is kind of moving a little faster. But by now, I can see the locomotive smoking up front. We're running out of coaches. People are still cramming themselves in. Now, I vividly remember this because we were in the last coach, or the first coach, next to the locomotive. We just jammed in, pulled everything we could get in, and now I could hear the guns going off. And right outside of St. Pancras Station are these huge gas holders. You know what they look like. Big cylindrical tanks with runners. And I was by the window looking, I could see the flashes bouncing off the gas holders. This town, the station was being bombed. So I hear the whistle, I hear the engineer pull the throttle, and I think, now that I'm very familiar with steam locomotives, that engineer had that throttle up back here somewhere. It thundered out of town. But as it did, the bombs started getting very loud, and the flashes very bright, and all the people in our carriages started to scream. Never forget my father. He stood up and said, "It's okay. What you hear are the anti-aircraft guns. Quieten down. It's not a problem." So they quietened down. And we thundered out of town. Later on, my mother said, "He was a bloody liar." Because guns go bang, whoosh. What we heard was whoosh, bang. They were bombs. So the next day in the newspaper, sure enough, they hit the very end, the buffer stop of the line we were on as we pulled out. And that was my first and most memorable train trip. Just to sort of digress a little bit, my lovely wife and I have a very strange hobby. Oh, we did have. We collected full-size trains. True. When I first got here in 1957, steam was being phased out all over the United States. And I had a love for steam, I really did. And so, like a crazy fool, they were scrapping them like crazy. I wound up buying 3 of them from the scrapyard. And later on, when I went home and told my then wife I bought a steam locomotive, well, that took care of that marriage. And later on, I found this lovely lady who loves steam trains. So much that I said to her one day, look, I've got 4 railroad coaches, World War II, vintage. I've got a 1907 steam locomotive made in Baldwin, Philadelphia. I want to move them into a little town called Avondale. I want to put a siding in there. I want to take all the seats out. And I want to put an antique shop in there. And I want to call it the Iron Horse Antique Shop. She said, let's go. All I did was bring in a bulldozer to grade the property. We bought a whole truckload of ties, and her and I hand laid 600 feet of track by ourselves with hand tools. And you know why I did it? Because I was an American and I could do anything. And we could do anything. And we've done that all our lives. But I'm skipping a few things. During the war, it was really a way of life because I was born into it. People say to me, well, don't you go to a shrink? I said, no, I'm perfectly normal. Well, over here, if anything happened like that, you'd be screwed for life. So now it's a matter of attitude. It's a matter of attitude. If you've got a good attitude, you can conquer anything. And I can't stand negativism. So anyway, after the war, I had seen all the aircraft go over, the bombers, the fighters, the gliders. I watched D-Day take place. My mother said to me one day before it happened, something's going on. And I said, what's that? She said, have you noticed that the feeding station across the street where they feed all the World War II prisoners, they're not there anymore. They've moved them all out. Something's going on. And sure enough, 3 months later, the invasion took place. They had moved all the prisoners of war north so that nobody would know what the hell was going on. So I watched the D-Day take place. The streets were full of tanks, full of trucks, full of people. It was just one constant stream going south. And I saw the aircraft lining up for bombing raids. Excuse me. And I took an active interest in airplanes. I started making models. Then I started making rockets. And one day I found myself doing my final exams in my senior school. Now let me explain something. In 1940, I was 4 years old. The British system then, formal school started at 4 years old. So I would walk to school on my own at 4 years old. People can't believe that. But anyway, it's true. And even during the war, there was always an air raid warden nearby, and luckily most of the bombing took place in the afternoon and evening. And the only thing that really scared me was the graveyard I had to walk through to get to school. The other thing that used to scare me was when we were in the subways. I've heard the bombing of screaming and hitting the area around the stations. But what really scared me was a great big monster coming out of that hole with 2 big bright lights. Sounded like it was going to eat everybody. Subway trains. But it's amazing. My last year of school, my master came up to me and said, you know, you did well. You're top of class. You're the best in class. Well, I was stunned. How could I have done that? I think it was not because I was so smart, it was the others were so dumb. Anyway, the good news was, because of the educational system, which was very socialism in those days, and very Victorian, You really had to be somebody to come out of a real poor class to get into college. Well, they got me into an aircraft plant as an apprentice. And I signed my life away for 6 years for the whole amount of £1 a week, which was $2.40. They would send me to college 1 full day a week for 6 years, and the other 4 days I'd work in the aircraft plant through all phases of aircraft construction. I loved it. I was very, very, very lucky because my first 2 years were in production and, of course, a couple of years of college. The third year, the aircraft company built the first jet engine powered Royal Air Force trainer. And during that time, because I was becoming very aviation oriented, I joined the Royal Air Force as a cadet. Well, unknown to me, the Russians were coming, and the Air Force wanted young pilots. So let's get all these young chaps in, get them in the Royal Air Force cadet program, so that we'll have young pilots, because they'd already lost most of them during World War II. And my training, my flight officer trainer, was a flying sergeant who flew in the Battle of Britain. And he was a tough SOB. So here I was at 17, flying, which to me was just a great thing. You know? I guess I fit the mold, it worked. They let me fly airplanes. Now, they didn't give me a license, they didn't give me anything other than the fact that I was flight officer qualified for training. So, now I'm 17, feeling pretty smart with myself, I can fly an airplane. And they asked me what I wanted to do with the rest of my apprenticeship years, and I said I wanted to work in the experimental department. And again, I wound up in jet engines, powering gas-powered rotary aircraft, helicopters. And at that time, I spotted, close your ears, this cute little girl that used to keep walking across the hangar floor. Turned out she was secretary to the chief test pilot. So I decided to start out by offering her an orange juice in the morning when she went by. And I became friendly, and later I started to date her. Now I'm in the experimental department, right next to flight test. So whenever they needed ballast, they would take these lead weights and strap them in the seat to make sure they had 200 pounds or 150 pounds of dead weight to qualify for the flight test program. So this young lady said, why don't you just get Brian, strap him in a damn airplane, and you got 175 pounds. So that's how I got an awful lot of flying and an awful lot of stick time. So when I finally graduated college and the apprenticeship program, her father said to me, hey, you're a pretty bright chap. Why don't you and my daughter go to Canada or the United States and have a decent life? And that's what happened. He was a great man, and I love him for it. Unfortunately, when we got to Canada, her homesickness and my new bright life didn't work, and we parted company. But I love her and her father for allowing me to have the gumption to come to Canada and down through to the United States. Well, as soon as I got here, the Army said, we want you. You can fly. You got a degree. We're going to make a helicopter pilot out of you. And I said, oh, no, I'm not. I'm a fixed-wing guy. They said, look, take a commission, be 6 years, and you become a flying officer here. You can fly anything. And I said, look, I just got here. I want to get on with my American life. And so I'll take the enlistment. The guy said, you're going to be sorry. You're going to wind up in helicopters anyway. So I said, no, I'll be a cook. So I got my orders. Fort Benning, Georgia, aircraft electrical repairman helicopters. And that was the greatest break I ever had. The Vietnam War was right on the horizon. The Cuban Missile Crisis was brewing. I got into a flight test division of the 11th Air Assault Division, strapping every kind of weapon on a helicopter you could imagine. I was a graduate engineer. The old man, the commanding officer, was the only other graduate. Everybody else was just draftees. They were drafting off the streets. So I became very popular because I understood these modern machines we were getting to analyze aircraft engines and jet engines. So I became a flying crew chief, test flying with the pilots these different aircraft and weapon systems. So after 2 years, you know what happens in the military. Today you can't do it. But I wound up flying just about every kind of helicopter you could imagine that we had there. And when I was getting ready to be discharged, they offered me everything to stay. And I said, no, I'm coming back. And so with that, I got a great job with Boeing helicopters. I started out as a flight test engineer in instrumentation. I helped design the jet engine test cell. One day they came to me and said, we need a circuit designed for the Navy for flotation gear. Our helicopters are crashing into the sea, they sink like a rock. So we designed this big airbag system, but you've got to design it for us real quick. I said, how long do I have? He said, 2 days. Well, it just so happened that 6 months earlier, I had done what they call a failure modes and effects analysis on a helicopter fire extinguishing system, which fires fire extinguishing liquid to a fire. Well, the flotation gear, air bubbles, were fired by the same squibs. So what I did was took that circuit, moved it over into this circuit, modified it with pressure sensors, water sensors, and in 2 days it was done. The Navy gave me a written letter of commendation. Oh my God, it made, because next week is my review. Guess what? No money. I was so mad that I went and joined the public relations department. And I'll tell you what, I made more money in the public relations department than I ever could have done in engineering. But that was not a break. One day my boss came to me and said, you can write, you can fly, you got a degree, I'm going to make you the editor of the Boeing newspaper. I said, I can't write. He said, no, but you're going to learn in one hell of a hurry. So lo and behold, he was right. And this was in the days when it was cut and paste, write the stories, interview the people. And the one thing I loved, I took the newspaper, and in the corner I had Nostalgic Corner. And I would go to these guys right here. The aircraft company was loaded with World War II and Korean War veterans. And I wrote their stories. That newspaper became the model for Boeing Seattle's newspaper. So I was very successful. Anyway, my boss said to me one day, I want you to go over to the plant. There's a young lady there who's designed a badge, and she has qualified. I want her newspaper article, I want a photograph on the front page, and she has won dinner for 2 for the Air Transport Command restaurant. So I went over to the young lady, and I said to her, this is what you won, dinner for 2 at the Air Transport Command. So guess what? I had dinner at the Air Transport Command. You see why I love Boeing? But seriously, here's a young, snotty-nosed kid that survived the war, that used to chase these guys for chewing gum and chocolates on the streets, because we didn't know what chewing gum and chocolate was. All through those struggles, all through school, all through college, and here I am, an American. 2 years after I got out of the Army, by the way, because in those days you had to have a declaration of an intent to become a citizen. So I said, if you're going to become a citizen, you're going to serve in the Army. And I did. And I did that. And here I am today speaking to you, a full-fledged, this is me speaking, I am a Yankee Doodle Dandy American Christian soldier. And I can only tell you, this is a great, most magnificent country in the world. And don't get in my way if you're going to take it away from me. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll conclude my personal story with what MacArthur said at the end of the war. He said, "We are gathered here, the representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solid agreement by which peace may be restored. The issues involving divergent ideals and idolatries have been determined on the battlefields of the world, and hence are not for our discussions or debate. Nor is it for us to meet in a spirit of malice, distrust, or hatred." Think about that. "But rather it is for us, both victors and vanquished, to rise to that higher dignity which alone benefits the sacred purposes we are about to serve. As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose to proceed to the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated." This is his final word when all that was done. "Let us pray that peace now be restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed." Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless.